Hi, I'm Stephanie Hutchins, life coach and owner of Serotinous Life. And I'm coming on today to discuss the importance of rewriting our story after experiencing trauma and changing the meaning we place on our traumatic experiences. My entire coaching practice called Serotinous Life. And my first book, which I'm going to do a small reading from today, is called Transformation After Trauma. The focus of both is getting my clients and my readers, okay, and my followers to get closer and closer and ultimately to the point of reaching post-traumatic growth. And as the name implies, it refers to growing after experiencing trauma. And for some people, particularly if the trauma is fairly recent, this concept of post-traumatic growth can seem, well, actually absurd to some people. And I was there, okay, for a long time. You know, when I was in my deepest depression, if somebody told me that I would be able to thrive not in spite of my trauma, but because of it, I would have thought they were a raving lunatic. So I understand that, you know, depending where you're at when you're listening to this, for you, it may even be difficult for you to hear, but I encourage you to think about what's possible and know that at any point in time, you can choose to change the meaning of the most painful experiences you've had in life. See, it's obvious that we can't do a thing to change our trauma. The fact that we experienced it, we can't change what we did do, didn't do, what somebody else did or didn't do. We can't do anything about it. And as long as we continue to focus on the failure of others, the who's to blame, and what our part in it and what we've done to survive in the aftermath. You take your pick. I mean, people choose to focus on all different things after experiencing trauma, but regardless of where you choose to focus, whether you're focusing on your perpetrator, you're focusing on, whatever event it was that was out of your control, or yourself, you're going to suffer. Okay, as long as you continue to focus on all of these things and events and people that you didn't have control over and won't have control over going forward. Okay, the only thing that you can control about your past circumstances is how you think about it. That's it. Okay, we can't change what happened to us, but we can change how we think about what happened to us. And that's why in my practice and in my books and everything I do, I place an immense focus on reframing. And reframing is simply about changing your perspective, okay, the way you look at a situation. And it changed everything for me the moment that I stopped focusing on everything I lost and all that would no longer be because of my trauma, and instead started to focus on everything I gained from my trauma or could gain from my trauma. And I can't state it enough. I mean, it sounds like, it might be I'm embellishing the significance that reframing has had on my, on how I've moved forward. But I was not able to move forward until I changed the meaning behind my trauma. Yes, there were a lot of things I did as far as like gaining coping skills and setting goals to move forward, but I kept getting stuck along the way. Anytime I started to think about my trauma, I would start backpedaling. And so to keep progressing forward without continuing to backstep, every single time I progressed forward, I had to change how I thought about my trauma. Okay. And so well, actually, this is, I think, a good time to do a small reading from my book. So my first book, here we go, if you can see it. Transformation after trauma, embracing post-traumatic growth. If you're also not familiar with my story, mountains have been extremely critical in my healing journey, which is why, well, I have mountains on my cover. So I want to just do, again, a small reading from actually the conclusion of my book. And I start out this paragraph with a quote from Dr. Brené Brown. And I'm going to tell you, if you're not familiar with her work has been really important for me in my healing. She does a lot of work on shame and blame and resiliency and I'm going to talk about it in this. I'm going to do a reading that's going to talk a little bit about my trauma, but much of my trauma involves sexual violation. And it's very common after individuals are sexually violated to struggle with feelings of self-blame, unworthiness, on being unlovable, and her work has really helped me to do my inner work of working through my deep-seated shame and ways that I blame myself and my, in many ways, unwillingness to be vulnerable with others in fear of getting hurt again. So if you're not familiar with her work, I really encourage you to look into her work. And my actual favorite book of hers, it's an audiobook, is called The Power of Vulnerability. And so I start out with a small quote from that book. So Dr. Brené Brown said in The Power of Vulnerability, when you own your story, here's the power of that. You get to write the ending. So when you say, yes, this happened to me, but I own this story, and here's how this story is going to end, you become not the subject of the story, but you're the narrator of the story. So my story is, I've been sexually violated multiple times by several different men. When I thought I was unlovable, I found a man who loved me in ways I never imagined, and then I found him dead. But my story also includes adventures around the world, me completing my PhD, and changing the lives of more students than I can count. I have a sense of empathy and compassion that makes me connect with others on a deep level. My life has been blessed in more ways than I could have ever imagined. My traumas weren't the end of my life or story. They marked the beginning of a tumultuous but beautiful journey. There truly is beauty in darkness. And so I'd like to reiterate that I struggled for years with very severe depression. It was quite bad. And I was contemplating suicide almost daily for years. And it's because during that time, I was only focusing on how I've suffered, like an immense portion of my life I spent suffering, and I didn't understand it. I thought there was something that must be wrong with me to be abused over and over again and just experience painful circumstance after circumstance, blamed myself for, ways that I could have or been involved or should have done something differently, even though I in many ways had no control over what was happening. And so that's the point. When I focused on my story just being about pain and suffering, I suffered. But when I started to look at the possibilities in front of me, again, not in spite of my trauma, but because of it, it opened up doors for me. So when I saw that I could really help people and connect with people who were in pain because of my deep knowing of pain, it's not going to be like I'm grateful that I experienced my trauma, but what I can do is make meaning of my trauma. I can say that something good can come out of these just horrendous experiences that I've had. And and so again, if you're at this point, the point in your healing journey where this just is not an accessible thought process to you, just know, keep in the back of your mind that it is possible. And what I encourage you to do, whether you're in this place or whether you're try to make me where you're in the place of trying to make meaning behind your trauma, I encourage you to listen or read stories of other people who have experienced immense suffering and who have come on the out, have made it to the other side, and not only are just surviving after their trauma, but are thriving after their trauma. And because that's what I did, you know, when I was in this place of contemplating suicide on a daily basis, I had, of course, just negative thought patterns on repeat. And so, in order to interrupt those thought patterns, I had to input new thought patterns. And so, so listening to audio, like from different speakers and different authors, changed everything for me. When I started to listening to uplifting and motivational and empowering audio, whether it was again in the form of books or podcasts or YouTube videos or songs, it allowed me to interrupt those thought patterns that I was, just ruminating over and that were keeping me stuck. Okay. And once I was able to stop those thought patterns, I was able to see that there was a way out. It was like it opened up a clearing. And so that's why I like it's hard sharing my story sometimes. It requires me to be vulnerable, and sometimes it's hard. But each time I share my story, it gets easier. And each time I share my story and somebody listens to it, it gives them permission to share theirs and to tell their story in a way where they can make meaning of their suffering. And they don't have to just make the meaning of just that they've suffered. They can insert new language into their story. And that's why Dr. Brene Brown says in her quote, you can become the narrator of your story, so you can change in the meaning behind what you've experienced. And again, that's all we have control over. That's it. We only have control over how we think about our trauma. We don't have control over the fact that it happened. And so I know it's not easy getting to this point of rewriting your story, but it's really important work. And so I encourage you to try it out. You can, try writing out your story, not just about the pain, but what you've gained from your trauma or what you could gain from your trauma. You can write it in your journal. You can talk it out with someone that's close to you. You can think about it while you're spending time by yourself. So I said a bit ago that the mountains were really important in my healing journey. And I spent a lot of time by myself in the mountains early on in my healing journey, and it was really important for me. Of course, I focus on being safe and everything out there by myself, but there was something really important behind me pushing myself mentally and physically in the mountains and seeing that I still survived. Even though it was hard, I survived. And so when I was by myself, most of the time there's no one else around in the mountains. I talked out loud to myself or inside my head, and like reworked my story while I'm talking, and said, if I'm seeing that I'm getting stronger with each hike, and I can also apply that to my traumas, that each trauma made me stronger so I could handle the next. And that now, like, I didn't ask to be stronger, but now that I had, one progressive blow after another, I feel like I'm a powerhouse. I'm like, after all of this that I experienced, I'm still standing. And so I now can look at this with immense, I'm like so empowered and feel like I can just conquer conquer the world. I can do anything that I set my mind to, because I've literally been through so much, and I made it through. I survived. And the mountains reminded me of this, as I pushed myself mentally and physically for long distances and a lot of elevation gain. It was hard, but I got to see I could do hard things and to be okay and actually be stronger for the next time I had to push myself. And so, yeah, it's just these little shifts. And again, that's what reframing is. It's about looking at something from a different frame. So the same situation, but from just a different lens. And so I encourage you to try it out for yourself. And again, it won't be easy, but it's possible. And so you got to just be patient with yourself and don't push yourself farther or faster than you're ready to go. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And thanks for listening. Bye for now.